I'm Yomaira Figueroa again, and I'm a professor in the Department of English.
I'm Méndez. I'm an associate professor of Spanish in the Department of Romance and Classical Studies.
Hi, I'm Tama Hamilton-Wray. I'm associate professor in the Residential College of the Arts and Humanities, and I work in Africana film.
I am Jeff Ray. I'm a professor in English film studies and a filmmaker.
Thank you. Okay, so before we open up the questions to the audience, we're going to just talk a little bit amongst ourselves, some comments on the film. So there's a whole lot going on. And so I wanted to, one of the things I wanted to open up in saying is this film puts up front the kind of colloquial saying in Spanish, ¿Y tu abuela dónde está? Right? And your grandmother, where is she? And so in this context, Latin American and Caribbean context in which mixed race is part of our 500-year history of colonialism, this move towards whitening yourself seems to be oftentimes the opposite of like maybe African American conceptions of hypodescent. So while in the US, the idea that one drop of black blood makes you black, in Latin America, a drop of white blood gets you a little bit closer to perfection, a little closer to whiteness, right? And so behind any kind of light skinned or white Latin American, si tiene guille, if they think they're like too good, right? You can say, ¿Y tu abuela dónde está? Right? You can ask them, where's your grandmother? Because we know she's black, right? And so here we have this black grandmother in the front and center of the film with her grandson. And so we have all these kinds of vectors of violence, including race, poverty, gun violence, and then I think the central arc of the film, thinking about sexuality, right? And all of this is happening in this moment in which Hugo Chavez is very sick, you know, dying of cancer, and thinking about what are the legacies of the Bolivarian Revolution in Venezuela. And so, yeah, there's a whole bunch of other things, but I think we can, I mean, that's my initial reflection.
So for me, there are so many things in the movie. I think race and also sexuality are treated almost the same way in the film, in the sense that it's addressed, but it's not addressed directly. It's addressed in a very subtle way. For me, it resonated the whole notion of mirar at the end of the film. Julian tells his mother, "Tienes que mirar, no? En esta casa todos miramos. You have to look at me and you have to look at us. In this house, everyone has to see." And it resonates with the way that the society in which Junior is growing and everyone around him tends to not exactly see how important difference is. The way difference is treated here is in a very traumatic and violent way, right? In the house where Junior's growing up, and also on the streets where he's navigating and trying to get to know the people around him. So for me, the whole notion of difference is one that I just kept gravitating to, and it really came together when he said, mirar, no, tienes que mirar. So that was the first thing that called to me, right? So we weren't supposed to write anything, but I wrote a couple of things as I was watching the film again. So the other thing that kept coming back to me was the whole constant struggle in the film for a self-construction, trying to define yourself despite how everyone else around you is trying to define you. So for example, for me, it was really powerful that in no way did Junior ever say that he was gay or that he was attracted to another guy. I mean, we just assume that he's attracted to the store owner, right? Never was this verbalized, but yet the story is completed when we're gazing at the film and we're trying to make this narrative come together for us. And that was the other thing that was interesting to me. The characters are elegantly created for me in the sense that they were not completed. You know, we complete these characters by the way that we view them, by our own stories. So it was powerful to me that the mother, Marta is the epitome of the unmotherly mother, in the sense that there are times where we may have a lot of anger towards her, but the anger goes away and comes back to us just because we can understand certain things that she's going through, right? So we have on the one hand the struggle for self-construction, and the other sense is the fear of not being able to self-preserve yourself, which manifests in the film for me with the notion of losing control, which is at the center of Marta. So all in all, just to say, in my, what was interesting to me was that the movie is just as much about Junior as it is about Marta, the grandmother, Carmen as well, because she epitomizes, of course, la abuela negra, no? But this abuela negra is doing the same thing that Marta is doing. She's defining for Junior what he is and who he is by dressing him up in something he doesn't quite understand nor knows that he wants. So,
Okay. So the thing I thought about when watching the film and Good Hair, I love the Bad Hair. I'm sorry, Good Hair, Bad Hair. So for me as an African American, seeing the film and just kind of address that first, and kind of in all the ranges in any black family, with all of us of African descent and European descent, all that mixed up, and kind of, as you said, there's one drop rule, but there's still kind of, whiteness is still the desired, and the good hair, and how's it look in the kitchen, when our daughter was small, who's now 31, our auntie, who was very, very color conscious, Jasmine has blue eyes, and she was just enamored with those eyes, and one of the boys, one of our sons, Jasmine or one of the kids, like put Vaseline on her hair. That's what she told us. Put Vaseline on her hair, and it'll stay straight. So it was all this kind of, and we called it the Great Hair Watch. She was waiting for the hair to kink up. But so I mean, the same kind of notions of hair.
It wasn't a long way.
In African American culture, and is generational as well. So that stuff happens, and so seeing that struggle the kid was having, and kind of how he saw himself in the mirror, like who he wanted to be, and kind of going back to the mirror. But then also there was something else that, all those moments in the bathroom where he could just, play, number one, but also imagine himself as this other thing, or with another kind of appearance that was pleasing to him. But it was also fraught with, white supremacist images of beauty. And then the other thing is how he floated above things sometimes. And I thought about all the ways that he was caged in by fences, by walls, but he created a world where there was the dancing, when he closed his eyes, when he made that range of chairs in the house and walked above the ground. There was all these times, and I loved the way that he attempted to control not just the image, but also his world around him. And so I thought about that as we moved through the film. I was hopeful, but I don't, like what will happen to Junior, I don't know. Junior did take some control in some places and times, but then at the end we don't, we're not left with that. So I'm just going to leave it at that. My first, some impressions.
Okay. It's a beautiful film. I mean, just in terms of filmmaking. I'll talk about that, then I'll get all vulnerable and stuff. Just the filmmaking, part of what the film does well is it's a restrained film in the fact that sometimes there's not a lot of dialogue. Oftentimes it's just a look. And throughout the film, he's looking a lot. He's the watcher, he's looking, and then finally this lovely line at the end, look at me, look at me, look at me. So we get a lot of that. But also the inside the house is, it's inside the house, it's pretty cramped, things are pretty tight in there. And then once we go outside, we're exterior, but we're still, in a sense, tight. We have, these beautiful shots of these housing projects, you know, that are thick and that look almost like monsters standing up there. And we're constantly surrounded by that. And the film does a great job with sound, the traffic sound, inside the bus sound. And so, in a sense, for me as an audience, I'm feeling like I can't escape this. So the filmmaker does a really good job of creating this world that they occupy. And I think that that's really important. The other part is the painful film. It's just painful. And I think if you watch a lot of films, we're always trying to do this anyway. I think a good film will have us trying to figure out what's next. But there's a foreboding. And so there was some point in there, I'm trying to remember exactly what, but I'm like, this kid's gonna cut his hair. And I knew that was coming. And when it happened, I was just like, damn, bruh. Oh man. So he's made to cut his hair. And so in a lot of ways, this kind of parallel story, I mean, it's kind of in this realist tradition, but you have this parallel story of this coming of age of this boy and the mother. And so, you know, in a real sense, this film points out that any sense of non-conformity, any sense of kind of space to be, any kind of sense to kind of root to explore is like a really privileged position, you know? It's a position that is privileged dependent upon kind of where you at, who your mother is, who your dark grandmother is, who you're supposed to look like, and what other folks expect you to do and be. There's a beautiful shot in there, I think that Tama talks about his freedoms, but there's a beautiful shot of him, and I just love this, I'm gonna be dreaming about this, and I'll steal it for one of my films, where he's just in the bus.
Yeah.
I just love that because surrounded by all this stuff, it's like, okay, this is me in my space. Just for a moment, and it's gone. But it's a beautiful moment. And that's the moment that I thought that the character was kind of the freest. And the last thing I'll say is that the end song and the title credits are in total opposition to the feeling of the film. And I'm like, damn, just put a little bit of that in just at a moment, but that just struck me as, you know, the end credits are almost the total freedom. You know, I get to wear the suit, I get to dance, I get to be, okay, film's over. So.
And just before we open, I wanted to say something a little bit about the kind of architecture of the place. So I was looking up these buildings in Caracas, and I think it's a Swiss architect who designed these buildings, and each building has 568 units, and they're kind of like these brutalist looking structures, right? And they were supposed to resemble or supposed to be this utopia, right? This kind of like the projects, right? Like this beautiful, like middle class kind of utopian space, and then we see what actually ends up happening in this space. And so there's all these disenchantments that we're able to witness. And I think there's also a lot of fear. And I think one of the things that keeps coming up is the fear of rape, right, between Junior and his friend, right? They're very young, but they kind of know what the deal is about where they're at, right? There's the fear of like violence, right? So the idea that the grandmother doesn't want Junior to be killed like his father, like her son. There's this fear of homosexuality, right? And there's so much spoken and unspoken throughout it, because even the questions of race are unspoken until they are spoken, right? So like, it goes to the doctor, it's like, oh, you remember my son, the black one, right? Like, oh, you see, right? So there's these moments, but the very last lines of the film, you know, is Junior telling his mother, no te quiero, right? Like, I don't love you. And what she says back to him is a bit like, you don't know, right, what she's saying, because she says, yo tampoco. So you don't know if she's saying, I don't love me either, or if she's saying, I don't love you, right? And so there's this moment that you're actually not sure what's happening here, and I think neither one of them probably do either, right? So I think it leaves us with a lot to talk about. So I think that's just the tip of the iceberg. So joyous questions.
Well, I just have comments.
The whole comment about looking, remember when he is always staring at his mother? I mean, he's staring at her that A, you know, that she's lighter than he is, B, that she really doesn't love him. I mean, compared to the white baby, where she doesn't understand him and he really just wants her love. And that whole scene too, when she's trying to change him by having the sex scene in front of his eyes and she moves the couch, you know, so that he's in vision, is just the cruelest scene. So, I mean, this is the second time I've seen it. And I've been to Venezuela. I was there in the 70s when it was just this, in Caracas, and it was just this gorgeous, beautiful city. And now, you know, they have a whole different system. And I just, one other theme in the whole movie was survival. You know, the mother was trying to survive, the religious group was trying to survive, you know, the little girl wanted to be a beauty queen to survive. So you're right, it had many, many layers. So it wasn't a question, it was just a comment.
So I imagine this will be like a recurring question throughout the festival, but so I don't speak Spanish at all, so I was kind of having to watch the movie by just reading the subtitles. And I'm just wondering if one of you could speak to maybe something that was lost in translation, where there was like emotion or something, just, you know, from actually like hearing what they're saying versus having to like read it.
One thing I'll say is I watched this last night. This is like my third or fourth time seeing the film, but I watched it last night on Amazon Prime, and the captions are different. The captions on Amazon are terrible. Terrible. When he says, I have bad hair, tengo pelo malo, I think the caption was like, I have silly hair. Or crazy hair. Yeah, something like that. So I was surprised at the captions here. I was like, oh, okay, like, because I was going to be ready to say, like, it was terrible. If you don't speak Spanish, this was not what the film was about, right? But it's different, so.
I think it translates, well, inevitably when you translate something, you lose something eventually, right? But I think the spirit of it was there in terms of how it was translated in the captions. But as was mentioned before, a lot of what was expressed was not via dialogue. That was what was portrayed was via the gaze or body movement, dancing, walking around the city. So a lot of it was there, and I think it was transmitted in a powerful way that you didn't really need to know Spanish in order to get a feel for it, I think.
I don't speak Spanish, and I'm not going to answer your question. But I will answer it with this. One of the first films that we made was a short called The Beautiful Ones, and it was 20 minutes long, and the person who shot it for us, the late, great Ricardo Restrepo, he was a classmate of mine in film school. He passed away last year. He's from Colombia. But one of the best compliments that he gave us was he took the film home that summer, and he showed it to a group of people, about 30 people. And then he told me, he said nobody spoke English, but everybody got it. And he said, we watched it 3 times. And so I've just never forgotten that, just in terms of sometimes things being lost in translation, but the big picture in, I think, good filmmaking being pretty evident. So, yeah.
I want to speak to something, not the translation, but you brought us the fact of watching the film twice and what's not said and kind of how subtle so many things are in the film and the different readings that are left, which is, to me, a really good storytelling that we are able to bring. We always bring our own perceptions to any thing we see, but for this film, the first time I watched it, I was way into the film and, before I realized that the mother thought her son was gay. You know, there were his gaze of the boy. The kid who at the store. I thought, of course he's enamored with this boy. Of course, a teenage boy. And in the way he moved in the world, of course he's a boy who moves in the world like this. And so there were, and so a lot of things seeing it a second time, I saw things I didn't see and also thought about it different because of course I'd seen it once and now I'm like, oh, okay, these were moments when maybe you could have this interpretation, but I thought, what a great film that you could kind of pull from it different things at different times and kind of watch it through these different eyes. And the last thing, Susan, you mentioned him gazing at his mother for all these reasons, but I also thought he was trying to figure his mother out.
Right. Exactly.
And she's also trying to figure him out. So that was these two people, and that's also why the relationship was often so fraught and intense, and moments where there was a moment of kind of tenderness, and then it could turn so easily. So that was, that tension we felt in the film again was always there in those relationships.
So I have a question about sort of the possibility of generations in the ways in which, what is your take on the grandmother and the mother having this younger generation of men and the precarity of how these not yet men are going to take care of them? And is there a sense of this sort of dividing up that is not about love or not only about love, but that is about what happens when one gets old? I'll just be curious about that.
Well, I think a part of it is, the poverty, and I hate using that term because I think in the States, once you start using the term poverty, it covers everything else. And I just hate the way it is used. So that's my disclaimer on using the word, but I'm going to use it here. But I think that no, I won't use it. I think the situation is so precarious that you see, the mother's economic situation, trying to get by as this woman and mother. And the thing about the survival of the son, so mom and grandma have that on their mind, but in different ways, you know what I mean? And so that survival of the son, and I'm not sure it makes the leap about, that they'll take care of us. In a sense, it's about just, okay, let's get from here to here. Let's get this boy to teenage. Let's get this teenage to manhood. And let's hope and pray and do everything that we can to survive. So I think that was an undercurrent of the mother's fear of him being gay, or what will happen to him out in these streets, or out in this neighborhood. So I think that kind of survival thing in this circumstance, in this situation for this young man, I think, and this young man with his bad hair, got those so-called strikes against him. Bad hair, gay, all those things. So I think that survival thing and that kind of pressing of economic and poverty is a word I hate to use, and those kinds of things, and day to day, I think that was the main thing that mom and grandma were trying to deal with this young man.
I'll disagree on a little bit here because I think there's a scene in which the grandmother's asking the mother for the son, and the mom is like, you just want him to take care of you. She's like, yeah, you have one, I have one, right? And then you see these moments in which Junior is like putting lotion on his grandmother's back, getting her water, doing the small things that she can do. But I think what that begets is a broader understanding of this lost generation of men, right? And so when you have this mother's presumably widowed, right? I think some of the kind of synopses of the film say that. But we think about Junior's father being killed and about the kind of gunshots that you hear. You think about this entire generation of young adult men who are supposed to be taking care of their children, who could take care of their own mothers, right? And so there's this moment in which Junior tells his mom, I'm gonna take care of you until you get old. right? So there's this kind of sense of loving care, and it doesn't seem like she wants that from him, right? But I think that there is this understanding like that the grandmother is missing something. So I think that they are worried about her survival for sure, but there is a sense of like, who will take care of me when as I age, right? Like I have no son, right? For Carmen, at least. And there's this really interesting understanding between the mother and the grandmother, right? So she's like, that baby is not my son's kid, right? And it wasn't until like the third time I saw it, I was like, oh, that dude in the hallway is that baby daddy, right? Like, I was like, a good, right? But the grandmother's like, well, if my son didn't care, then I don't care. But also, I have everything that you owe me tallied up in this notebook. Don't worry about it, I got you. But also you owe me money, right? And so there's a sense of like understanding but not understanding between these two women, especially when it comes to him. And I think that they're both pushing him in opposite directions, right? So for the mom, the fear of him being gay is like, be the construction of manliness that is like macho, like machista, all these things that you need to be in this society to survive. And the grandmother's like, no, let him be a singer. Let him have his hair straight. Let him do these things because then he won't get killed.
As you had mentioned, there's a lot left for the viewer to kind of infer, and I was just wondering in specific three things, like you mentioned how the father was killed or taken out of the picture, killed, what happened at Carnival with Junior, and how the mother lost her job. And I was wondering if you could just speak to that and what you think that means for the bigger themes of the film.
So I think the Carnival Story, I think, is the untold story that provoked the main fear that the mother has and the fear that her son is gay. We can only assume that that was the first time that Junior was publicly free with creating an identity for himself that was queer or out of the norm for that space. And it was interpreted within the carnival as permissible there. But when the mother saw that, it traumatized her in such a way that it continued to affect the way she saw him outside of that space, right? So I think that was my interpretation of the untold carnival story, because it was mentioned numerous times by the abuela, the grandmother, and also by Junior and his friend. And it was always tied to dressing up in the correct costume for the picture in order for him not to elicit the same kind of disgust in his mother that was provoked when he was in the carnival. So that was really powerful, I think, in the sense that it wasn't really shown or explained what happened, but we can only infer by the reactions, right?
Watching this film, growing up as like a gay Chicano in a household, there's like a lot of resistance. And one thing that sticks out to me is that I was wondering if we could comment on is the conflation of gender and sexuality. And so the ways that Junior's masculinity is being watched. So we mentioned him watching his mom. I feel like he's always watching people for gender performance is one of the things. And so he's always trying to touch his mom's hair and kind of figure that out. And so I was wondering, I don't know, it feels like, because I feel like the film is making a comment on the ways, like y'all said, like Junior never says anything. He's just watched the whole time. But then he says later, look at me. So what's that difference between being watched? Because he's watched consistently for his performance, but then not feeling like he's looked at. And what does that have to, and the ways that then gender and sexuality are being conflated in those moments?
I think como que falta de hablar, right? There's no conversations that are happening around this. And that moment where his mother's, she won't even talk about her sexuality. She just kind of goes around the subject. And so does the doctor, right? He says, he needs to see you with a man, like a role model, right? And then she takes that as, let my son watch me having sex with a man, so he'll know what it is to be a man, right? As if, exactly what you're talking about, as if this idea of a performance of gender, right, of this role is the same, is equal to sexuality. And so because there's no unpacking of it, there's no even space to disentangle how it's constructed, right, and how it's understood in that context. For me, at least, that was like a clear, there's no space for him to even talk, right? There's hardly space for him to be alone in a restroom, by himself, right, in his own bathroom at home. So yeah, and I think it goes back to the question of feeling como trancado, right, like just, yeah, there's no space in the film.
But it makes me also think about the boys that he does see, the men that he sees. Of course, there's, the adult men that his mother, her old boss, which there's really no kind of watching that performance. But the boys on the basketball court, the kid who mans the store, and then the boys who dance, what do you call they were doing the break dancing, right? So that was really interesting. And then, there's one other moment when he goes take his picture. You can be a soldier. Mm-hmm. Not only is it, this kind of hyper masculine, but also a black guy. So I thought when he looked at that picture, like, no, that's definitely, not me. But it was just interesting. They were so narrow too. Like this gender performance was that it was supposed to be this male model. He's supposed to be maybe looking at that the mother hoped he looked at, or how represented in the film.
But a lot of what is verbalized is, of course, through the mother, and we see it through her point of view and through her perspective of what it is. I'm glad you brought up the dancing, because to me that's another small but very interesting part early in the movie, because the boys are break dancing, and break dancing, heavy beat, and we're spinning and stuff. And how is he dancing? And Ma's like, why do you dance like that? You can dance, but you gotta dance like that. You gotta dance like a man, so to speak. But why do you dance like this? And so, again, even when he is, I think that's just a critical moment early. And then, again, when we go back to this looking scene, look at me, and that to me is one of the powerful things. That's one of the only times, I think anyway. And what I like is, he's a kid, and I think a lot of times we try to, in larger and wider society, we try to say, you are this, or you are this, or this, or this, or that, and you have to be this, or this, or this, or that. But he's a kid. He's just there. But he's saying, look at me, on my terms, with my hair like this. I'm not getting off this chair. Look at me. And pretty shortly after that, either defiant or stand-up moment, she starts packing up. This movie's painful, man.
I just want to see if you could comment a little bit about the kind of the Chavez allusions, and so because it seems to me that the film is a deep critique of the Revolución Bolivariana, or the Bolivarian revolution by Chavez, which at some point tried to give equality and bring all kinds of promises to Venezuela at some point, and a lot of the characters seem to be related to that, and the ending is very telling. I think when he's they're all singing the same song at school, and is a way of controlling identities and not allowing individuality in some way. So I was wondering if you could comment a little bit more on that political message.
I just have real brief. I would just comment on the end of the school. It just reminded me of demands in certain places that you stand for the national anthem and that you pledge of allegiance. So It seems that demand is all over the damn place.
And I also think the film gives you both possibilities. You know, I think it shows you the fragmentation of that ideology that was present with Chavez, and I think you see that by way of the characters like the mother, el personaje de Marta, no? She's undergone a huge change that is obviously going to affect her political ideology and her place in the society. I also think it's a huge social commentary when you think about Pilar and Pilar's job, which it's not a religious sect, what she's doing in her apartment. What she's doing is creating a space for different women to come in and have different sessions of self-affirmations. I don't know if you guys realize, but they were saying, no tengo hambre, no tengo hambre, as a way of repeating a behavior that they hope that they can repeat as robots eventually, right? And that this is happening within this place that's, you know, we don't want to use the word, it's not, we don't want to use slums, but it's in a location in which they're all struggling, right? So it's clear that if they're having to rehearse even that statement, you know, that eventually turns into, sí, soy feliz, no? That this is a rehearsal, a constant rehearsal within this regime, right? So there is that on that side, right? And then the fragments that are shown on TV are fragments of the overall society cutting their hairs and saying something about solidarity with Chavez. So it's, you know, I think the film gives you both possibilities. If you're Chavista, there's maybe a story for you there in the film. If you see a different light or different possibility for change, I think there's something there in the film. I think the director gives you a really good film in the sense that we finish the stories by way of who we choose to write along with in terms of characters and what stories we want to continue here.
I would say that Chavez's like cancer and his chemotherapy and all that stuff is like off scene. It's also something that's not seen. All you see is the people who are like fervent Chavistas shaving their head in solidarity with him. And all of these different religious sects coming together, right? Like this possible unity between all religions. It wasn't even denominations, right? It was like, todas las religiones. It was like, oh, sure, of course. Are all gonna get together and pray away Chavez's cancer, right? So there are these moments in which like, there's this kind of overt political message, right? It's like booming in through the television, and then something else, like this pop music that's coming over the radio waves. And I think it becomes such an important backdrop to the moment because they're living in this revolution that was supposed to bring all types of security across social classes in Venezuela. And what you see is extreme economic insecurity for this family and in this particular space in Caracas. So I think there's this kind of underlying question, and I think you're right, it has things for people who are Chavistas and people who are against the revolution, right? And I think it allows the viewer to kind of take what they need or what they want to see in that moment. And I think that last scene that you referred to, for me, it was interesting because, I mean, we grew up singing the Pledge of Allegiance and, or singing the national anthem and singing the Pledge of Allegiance and all that stuff. So it actually didn't even register to me as something odd, right? Like it was just like, oh yeah, like we are all socialized to do these things, right? And whether we do them as individual children or don't, right? Like that's a different story, but it's part of like this idea of nation building, right? And of becoming citizens of a particular space. And now we have a space to question that here, more so. But what struck me was this young boy that sang so much throughout the film, who no longer sang, right? Se le fue la voz, right? Or he can no longer sing, right? So there's like this very deep sadness that you're left with, which is like something was taken from him, right? That not even this kind of like robotic thing that people do just automatically by like going to school every day, he can't even do that, right? And I think that we can read that as a protest, but then we can also read it as something that is like fundamentally, something fundamentally detrimental happened to this boy, right?
I just was thinking about Chavez, the hope that came with Chavez. And one of the things that I remember was around race because, and it was a moment for those who were mixed blood or those who were black, that Chavez was supposed to kind of, there was rhetoric around kind of an acceptance of the black grandmother. I remember that kind of, maybe you can help me if I'm wrong, but I guess I thought about that, but then I thought about what was happening on the ground, like how the contrast and what he represented. And then with him being sick, like you said, the precariousness of like what was going to happen next. Because he was a hope for the marginalized as well. And this was, so that also added to the tension for me, like the film, without anything like big happening, there's so much like tension that runs through the film for so many reasons all the way through, and that you speak to that.
And so I got the cue to wrap it up like this, like very wrap it up. So we're gonna wrap it up. Thank you so much for coming out tonight, and please a round of applause to the organizers of this film.